Good evening. Welcome to the City of Sugar Land City Council meeting for Tuesday, July the 16th. First item on the agenda, we're going to do an invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Gandhi is going to lead us in both of those activities.
Thank you, Mayor.
Dinesh.
Please join me in prayer. Lord, we ask for your continued inspiration in helping us to make just decisions that will be in the best interest for all people of this community. We ask that you continue to provide safety to our city's first responders who spend their days and nights protecting our citizens. We find it easy to ask for your inspiration and blessings, but we also want to thank you for the blessings we enjoy each and every day. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number one is the public comment portion. It's for any item that doesn't have a public hearing. Tonight we don't have any public hearings. So we have one person signed up, and I'll ask that person, Mr. Roy Whiffen, if he'll come forward. He's going to speak on item number, is it B? You tell me what item you want to speak on. I can't read your handwriting.
I apologize, it's English. It's on BC.
B through C, item number B through C. On the consent agenda.
It's on the Mayfield restrooms.
Okay, go ahead. You got 3 minutes.
Okay. The average price of a house in Sugar Land is between $180 and $250. This is a 3-bedroom house, fully fitted out. Tile in the kitchen, tile in the bathroom, 2-car garage. As I said, between $180 and $250. We have here the intention of building a restroom for $171,862, and I'm a little concerned that it's over budget in terms of what you're actually getting for your money. This seems to be exaggerated price, and I was wondering if any of the council members would, during their deliberations, comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move now to item number 2, review the consent agenda. Item number 3, consent agenda. All the items here we're going to take as one motion unless a council member wants to pull an item. If they pull an item, we'll take all the other agenda items on this particular, on the consent. We'll have a motion for that, and then we'll call back the other. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
I've got a motion, I've got a second. Anybody have any discussion? Vote at this time, please. And it passes with a 7-0 vote. Thank you. Item number 4, contracts and agreements. 4A, consideration of an action on authorizing the execution of a construction contract with Precise Services, Inc. in the amount of $1,205,509.40 for the construction of access roads for the airport west side entry and the public safety training facility projects, AP 1903 and CIP MU 1901. Lane Wolf, our vertical construction manager. Lane.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'd like to start off first with a little background on the project. We started this back in 2007 with the facilities master plan, looking at the training needs assessment for the police and fire department. Facilities master plan in 2015 took that a step further. We acquired the training facility property out there at the prison. We also started looking at what the master planning would be, and that was handled through Randall Scott Architects. During those meetings with Randall Scott, we looked at site layout, safety, and the programming for all the different activities that were to take place out there. We also ran through cost estimates at that phase. And then when we got the background to August 2018, we had a pivotal workshop with the council. This was during the budget time. And at that point, Randall Scott Architects had taken the master plan, developed it far enough to where we had a really good idea of what the overall master plan was going to look like. So that was important to review the layouts. Also, we introduced the Connex fire training prop. We had already had the gun range put into place. At this point, we were introducing the Connex and what it was going to look like. And then we had the overall site access, and that's why we're here today, is developing the roadway plan at that time. Since that time, the overall site updates have included the interim gun range being completed last summer. In January, I started working with Pacheco Coke on the design of the new access roads. This May, we approved the fire training prop, and it is currently under fabrication. In June, I also just contracted with DVR Engineers, and they are actually doing the design to get electrical power out there to the site so we can start running lights and other activities out there. Upcoming events from this point forward, we have some more site work that's going to happen for the Connex fire training prop. We have concrete foundations out there, water lines, and we continue to work, or I continue to work with the police department on gun range upgrades and enhancements there. This is the image that was shown to council back at the 2018 budget workshop. This was the Randall Scott Architects master plan. This gives you the forecasted overall layout of the site. Bottom corner, you can see where the interim gun range is currently. This is kind of where we are right now with the interim gun range showed. That was the first phase. Now we're going in with the Connex fire training prop for the fire department. And this shows the start of a roadway plan. This is also what was discussed back at the budget workshop. This is actually the submittal from the manufacturer right now. This is exactly what the new fire training prop will look like. And it's scheduled to be delivered in late October, early November. So the goals and scoping for this part of the work is basically site access. We have the airport side of the property, and we're planning on providing access along the west side of the airport to facilitate future airport developments on that side and overall general access. Tying into that is the training range on the left-hand side. So there we provide paved access to major components of the overall training facility. We selected Pacheco Coke as our civil engineer, and what they did, their scope included surveying the overall site. They designed all the access roadways, and they incorporated the site drainage. Here, zooming into the training grounds, and the way we did this bid program was we took all the roads, and for the most flexibility we could have, we broke it up into 5 bid units. For this presentation, I went ahead and added some color to those roads so you can see exactly what the extent of is each of those bid units. Now, what you'll find is back when we established during the budget workshop, we had funding that was going into this project for FY19, and we also had funding that was being programmed for FY20. Bid units 1, 2, 3, and 4 were planned to go in FY19. Bid unit 5 up there, the blue and the yellow road, were planned to go in FY20. Now, our budget pricing came in, the bid pricing came in better than we expected. So bid unit 5 is one of the larger costs. We are able, because of the good numbers, move that into FY19 and do that bigger package first. We've taken the smaller package, which is bid unit 3, and moved that one back to FY20. By doing this, it enables me to continue all the other little small projects I'm working on out there at the same time. So again, the bid process, it was broken up into bid units 1 through 5, color-coded, providing access to different parts of the site. Accepted for the FY19 road packages, bid units 1, 2, 4, and 5. Unit 3 will be scheduled to be handled in FY20, and we could potentially add that back into this existing contract through a change order. Here you have the bid. We had 4 qualified bidders. 2 of them were disqualified for bidding purposes. The engineer's estimate was 1.4, and our qualified low bid was Precise Services at $1.2 million. Budget, we have 2 CIP funding sources. AP 1903 is $919,000. ME 1901 training facility is $980 with the combined available funds of $1.9 million for the roads. The engineers recommended and lowest qualified bidders Precise Services at $1.2 million. This savings that we have in the project also enables me, like I was just saying, to continue on with several of the other projects that you see listed there. And with that, our recommendation is to authorize the construction contract with Precise Services, Inc. for the material and labor to install the access roads for the airport west side entry, AP 1903, and the public safety training facility, CIP MU 1901, and the amount of $1,205,509.40.
Clarifying questions for Lane? Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor. Do we, when this is a public road, obviously, that we're going to put in, do we, and with it being a facility that is going to have, equipment and training items, are we going to have it to where there's a gate or anything that kind of protects it from the public accessing it?
Right now, it's really not public. It's city property, but it's not open to the public. If you drive up to the prison property right now, we have an electronic gate that doesn't even let you get on the prison property from the very entry, the first entry. And this is located even further in the back.
Right, so there's no issues with trespassers and things of that nature?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
But we are continuing to add other measures out there to add protection. We're putting up fencing around the old prison building right now and the storage buildings and things of that nature.
Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Lane, the moving of the package 3, which was a road to an interim gun range, I believe,
That's correct.
from 19 to 20, what are the implications of that? I mean, right now, you can kind of get there, but you drive through these big potholes, and when you say interim gun range, is that what we saw that's already out there?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So,
What's out there, and I'm not sure when you were last out there, but I went and retopped that whole road with additional gravel. It's always been just an interim road to gain access with the idea that we would put this road in. The first couple of phases are on a schedule of only 60 days. So if we proceed in FY20, we're talking about putting this road in at the very 1st of October.
Lane, why don't you go through the visual? Go back to the visual that you had, and then you can, I think it's easier to understand that way. There you go.
okay. The other question I have is, you mentioned that you have a site drainage plan, and I'm assuming the scope of site is limited to what we're looking at on this screen and not the whole.
That's correct. When I say drainage plan, that was working in conjunctions because we're putting in these roads where in some areas could create dams of water that flows through there, so we had to channel this water in reaction to the roads that we're putting in.
Okay, because we
But
don't.
it does not address the overall drainage for that entire area of the city.
Yeah, I don't think we have a completed plan yet for the drainage for the whole area, do we?
No, sir.
Okay, so we're not going to do anything. We don't think we're going to regret when the whole facility, all 3 facilities get a master drainage plan, are we?
No,
sir. I think we're making sure that we're taking care of what we're putting in and doing it properly to where it does not create any problems, but we're not closing any doors by moving forward with what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Oh, Michelle, go ahead.
Lane, you mentioned, can you go back to the picture there, if you don't mind? You mentioned 1, 2, 4, and 5 you're going to do, but you're going to leave out 3. But it seems like you have dollars and cents available now, and you're pushing it out to FY20.
That's correct. There are several different other items that I'm working on currently out there. When I put in that fire prop, I've got to do site work to prepare for that fire prop. I have to put in a structural concrete slab to get that prop in there to be able to set it onto. I'll be paying for the electrical engineer that's designing 2 electrical drops to feed not only the interim gun range, but the fire prop. And then I'll have to bid that work out as well. So it frees up that money so I can keep moving with all these other activities that are happening simultaneously.
Sure, and that's not part of the 1.2. You've got the other, I think you said you had 1.9 available in the budget, right?
That's correct.
So that's what you're using towards to do
These
it.
other projects.
Okay, sounds good.
Anyone else? Motion to approve? I'll make the motion. Got a motion and a second. If you vote this time, please. And it passes 7-0. Thank you. Item number 5, ordinances and resolutions. 5A, consideration of an action on City of Sugar Land Resolution 1925, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, adopting the City of Sugar Land Stormwater Management Program for submission to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And we've got Taylor Denesi, Environmental Manager. Taylor.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Tonight I'll be providing a brief background on the Stormwater Management Program. I'll cover the 6 required minimum control measures that we must implement in this permit term, as well as the major program modifications that will be required during this permit term. I'll also cover what the next steps are from here. The Stormwater Management Program is an unfunded mandate that's delegated to the TCEQ by the Environmental Protection Agency with the goals of protecting water quality and reducing pollutants and stormwater runoff. I presented last month to City Council in a workshop detailing what the program requirements are and what those changes would be based on our population classification and the modifications that the TCEQ made to the permit requirements. Our Stormwater Management Program, or SWAMP, is based on a series of 6 minimum control measures, being public education, outreach and involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management in new development and redevelopment, pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations, and industrial stormwater sources. The major program modifications that we're seeing during this permit term include the development and implementation of a floatables control program and a post-construction inspection program. We also have to begin providing oversight to the city's pesticide, herbicide, and fertilizer application programs, as well as assessing flood control projects for their pollutant removal potential. We also have to develop and implement an industrial inspection program, as well as continue expansion of all of our programs into new territory in Greatwood. Staff's recommendation is for City Council to approve Resolution number 1925, which adopts the SWAMP for submittal to TCEQ. Our next steps would be to submit the SWAMP to TCEQ by the July 23rd deadline. Once the TCEQ receives our SWAMP, they'll conduct an administrative review and then authorize a 30-day public comment period. Once that comment period has ended, they'll conduct a final review, and if no further information is needed, then we would receive full approval of our SWAMP. Be happy to answer any questions.
Clarifying questions? Steve?
Thanks, Mayor. Taylor, would you remind me, the oversight of pesticide, herbicide, fertilizer, or whatever, is that the city needs to provide oversight to every single application of these things in the entire city?
That's our city contractors and any city staff that's applying those chemicals. We have to make sure we create application schedules for when the chemicals will be used, and then ensure that the chemicals are being disposed of properly.
So that's what our staff does?
Yes.
But
And then
so
any-
we're not going to be overseeing every single HOA that's putting fertilizer on the ground?
No.
Okay, and certainly not the individual homeowners?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Do I have a motion? Motion to approve. Got a motion by McCutcheon, second? Second. You got a second by Kermally. Close this time, please. And it passes 7-0. Item number 6, budget 6A, receive for filing the city manager proposed fiscal year 2020 annual budget and 5-year capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2020 to 2024. We've got our own city manager, Alan Bogart, and our director of finance, Jennifer Brown. And I see Ms. Jennifer May is making her way up, so Ms. Jennifer May, our Assistant City Manager.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we're pleased to be able to present the budget. It has been a long process getting to this point with much input and communication with the City Council throughout the process. And Jennifer May is going to play my role tonight and then turn it over to Jennifer Brown to go over the details.
Wonderful, Jennifer.
All right. Good evening. Well,
Good evening.
it is always a pleasure to be up here presenting to you, but especially so tonight as we present to you the city managers. They're even excited for you. The city manager's recommended fiscal year 2020 budget and 5-year CIP. As Alan mentioned, tonight feels like one simple presentation, but it's really the result of months of hard work by you, by the finance department, by engineering, and by people across every department in this organization who have put a lot of work into getting here tonight. So I will be stepping you through kind of a high-level overview of the policy and strategy aspects of the budget, including a look back at our historical success and kind of where we are going in the future as our strategies are needing to evolve a little bit. I'll wrap up with a little bit of a high-level overview of the priorities that are featured in this budget, but really Jennifer Brown will take you through the detailed look at the budget. And just one reminder as we kind of prepare to get into it, first and foremost, our budget is designed and intended to be reflective of your priorities and the residents of Sugar Land, recommending that it's not our budget, it's not staff's budget, but it's really the community's budget. So in looking at kind of where we've been in the past, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge that we, or really you, have had tremendous success and have demonstrated what I would call an unparalleled track record of financial stewardship. And so the community has accomplished this through a number of strategies that have been very intentionally and specifically tailored to our community and to our community's priorities. And so you've been able to maximize the conservative nature of our finances with a focus on a low residential tax burden. This has been made possible in large part due to voter approval of tools such as sales tax for property tax reduction and the economic development corporations, all of which have enabled us to pursue a targeted, aggressive economic development effort and destination city effort. But at the end of the day, all of that is important because the commercial revenue offsets the residential service cost. And so we're also proud that our commercial businesses benefit from that same low tax rate and that our championship workforce continues to be able to provide the highest quality level of services to both residents and businesses. And of course, when it makes sense to partner with others, we do that as well. The next few slides show some data to better illustrate the history of our success. First, our aggregate tax rate is the second lowest in the state of Texas among cities that are similarly sized, with an excerpt of those cities on the slide on the screen. And so kind of how has this been possible throughout the decades? One piece of our success has been our growing assessed value per capita, or kind of the averaging up of the wealth of the city to the benefit of our residents, particularly on a per acre basis and particularly in commercial developments like the one we're sitting in, Sugar Land Town Square. But I want to note that it is extremely important to not just stop at looking at an AV per capita. It's also equally, if not more so, important to look at what the residential tax burden is on a per capita basis, which then takes into consideration things like the value of commercial development and the increasing homestead exemption, which just further offsets that tax burden. And so this slide just looks at those same cities and looks at that residential tax burden on a per capita basis. And as you can see, we are not only below the average here, but we are especially below our peer cities when you look at cities that have an equal complexity or prestige that Sugar Land has. And so this just means that our residents pay lower property taxes per person than average, despite the fact that we do have high residential values. This gets even more impressive when you look at the residential tax burden per capita as a percentage of the average home value, where you can see why homeowners really should rather be a taxpayer in Sugar Land than anywhere else. And so without a doubt, this slide demonstrates that we have not just claimed success in lowering the nominal tax rate, but we've also made sure that our residents have continued to benefit from that low tax burden. This is just showing you that not only do we have the second lowest tax rate among cities our size, but we have also lowered our nominal tax rate by almost or around 18 cents since 1993, part of our long-term strategy of maximizing savings to residents on an annual basis as rapid growth was occurring, and recognizing that it could be and would be raised when we moved into a more mature city. And then on the right-hand slide, just as I mentioned earlier, shows that how in recent years in particular, we've made strategic and substantial increases to the residential homestead to continue to offset and lower that residential tax burden. Additionally, during this same time period, we've been expanding the services that the city provides in accordance with the desire of our residents. And that's everything ranging from taking over responsibility for drainage improvements, standing up our own EMS service, or even recognizing the importance of programs like rental registration and code enforcement in continuing to preserve the quality of life in our community. And so we are proud that we've done that while also maintaining a very lean workforce, well below the average of our peer cities. We're about fourth from the right on that chart. And what is also important to note here is that many of the cities on this list with a lower employees per capita are not full-service municipalities the same way we are, and that includes cities like Missouri City and even the Woodlands, and then few have airports. And so we recognize that you have a hard job. You have to achieve a balance of taxes and services, and that is difficult, but we believe that you and we together have achieved a great level of success, and we're proud that our residents agree with us as well. And so as you've seen before in our last citizen satisfaction survey, 97% of people rated Sugar Land as excellent or a good place to live. And then almost 70% stated that they were very satisfied or satisfied with the value they received for tax dollars, which is very impressive when you compare that to the national rate. And then when you include neutral responses, that number increases to over 90%. And then the last few lines just show that we're always appreciative when third-party publications recognize and celebrate our success too, whether that's for the safety of our community or how happy we are. So, with
And we've got good tasting water.
we do. I should have updated that slide. We do. I think Jennifer Brown will talk to you a little bit about the security of that good tasting water here in a minute. But with that said, we are approaching the city's 60th anniversary this year, and so just as we have done before, it is time to really look at an evolution of our strategies again. And so we know that our residents want us to continue to exceed their expectations and continue to deliver the Sugar Land way. And as such, our strategies that have worked in the past are going to need to change so that they can continue to work today. One of the things that is important as we go through this is we continue to have the same goals. We're just faced with a new reality. And so really as much is staying the same as is changing. But we know that we are no longer a rapidly developing community. Our infrastructure is aging, and changing weather patterns are testing that infrastructure even more than before. We have absorbed budget cuts and constraint in prior years that have had an impact on both the operations and the capital improvement program. We have looked at data that shows that maintaining an equal balance between the residential and commercial tax base is increasingly challenging. And then, as you are familiar with, the state legislature recently met and have tasked us with kind of responding to even greater challenges that are kind of undermining our financial resiliency. And so diving a little bit deeper into the developing community aspect, just as I mentioned, our infrastructure is aging, much of it at the same time, recognizing that it was developed at the same time with our master plan community heritage. And then we are beginning to see increases in our cost of services, competition for resources, and increased volatility of sales tax. And then we're seeing just an ongoing uncertainty in the economy, both locally with the ongoing delay of some of our major commercial projects, but also in the region, state, and nation with a lot of mixed signals about what the economy is going to do. You see some of that here with the growth in sales tax over time at really exponential levels, but then the slowing off of that growth and the increasing volatility of it. And so this is an important revenue stream for us, but it's been very important that we have made measures and taken efforts to become more resilient in how we budget for recurring sales tax. And then just to note that a study we did several years ago estimated that nearly 3/4 of our sales tax comes from non-residents and business transactions. You've seen the slide before that just shows the life cycle of a city. We are certainly beginning to experience aging and changing, but we are also being proactive in outlining strategies to ensure that we stay on that path too. And then here's the data that I referenced about the equity in the tax base, which shows that residential revaluation has outpaced commercial growth in recent years. And then one more before I kind of summarize this section is that, as you know, the legislative session was not entirely friendly to cities, and that included things like revenue caps that are eroding your flexibility to make decisions in the best interest of the community, but also things like right-of-way rental fees, the elimination of red light cameras that were an important safety tool for our community and also provided funding for additional traffic safety improvements, and then just little things that add up and impact the capacity of our workload to respond to priorities. And so, as Alan mentioned, we've spent a lot of time with you in the last few months talking about these challenges and the impact that they are having on our operations, on our ability to maintain our infrastructure. And so we have spent a lot of time looking at strategies and options for funding. And so that's what this next section will include. First, kind of just a review of the Sugar Land Way. It is a mindset, not a destination. It's really about exceeding the expectations that our residents have for us, both in terms of services and service levels, but also the value for the tax dollar paid, wanting to make that the lowest practical possible. And then anticipating responding to new challenges and using things like the budget process to continue to inspire confidence and create pride. But simply put, it's just about bold and thoughtful thinking designed to make life sweeter and more refined for our residents and businesses, with several priorities outlined by the City Council at the fall retreat this year, focused on public safety, the maintenance of our infrastructure, making sure that we are retaining and challenging a championship workforce, constantly improving the appearance of our community, and building upon our position as an economic powerhouse and financial leader. So what are the strategies that we talked about? Those include a variety of things, looking at opportunities to rebalance the tax burden between residential and commercial, considering future GO bond elections to fund those capital projects that do not have sufficient funding at this time, a completion of a review of fees and rates to ensure that we are appropriately recovering our service costs, and then the evaluation of innovative service delivery opportunities to provide not only the same or higher level of services, but to do so at lower costs, one of which Jennifer will step you through in a minute. And so with those strategies in mind, we are really trying to do three things through this budget process, and that is, one, respond to the constraint from prior years, respond to the legislative challenges, and focus on the Sugar Land Way to make sure that we are able to continue providing those key services with an emphasis on infrastructure. And specifically, the actions and strategies the FY20 budget has in it to accomplish that is the allocation of property tax revenue to support our operating needs within the rollback rate limitations, the raising of the tax rate approximately 1 cent in order for us to fulfill our commitment to complete the final phases of the 2013 voter-approved Parks bonds, with then the strategic use of the homestead exemption increase, which you have already approved, in order to offset the residential tax bill impact of that 1 cent increase, the supplementing of revenue needs with user fee increases, including EMS fees, and then proposing a 3-year bond program in FY21 through 23 to fund capital needs, with looking at a bond election in November, and then a focus on the long-term resilience of the city's water supply, both through securing additional resources and preparing for capital projects in accordance with the recently adopted IWRP. And so before I turn it over to Jennifer, just one wrap-up slide that we are extremely excited about this strategic direction and are proud of the budget that we are presenting to you. We believe that it will really enable us to continue to accomplish our key priorities and those priorities of you and our residents, as well as increasing our resiliency in FY20 and the future. And so we hope that you see the recommended budget the same way that we do, as a policy document that is setting us up for success in the short and in the long term. And then, again, everything that we do is looking to provide the highest level of service that we can to our residents while maintaining the lowest practical or possible tax burden for our residents. So with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer Brown to step you through the details.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. And when we say step you through the details, we mean very high level, because there are a lot of details, and we will send you home with some reading material this evening. I always joke that it's the instant cure for insomnia, if you happen to have that. So, all right, so I'd like to start with a general overview of the assumptions that we've used to develop the budget. So we'll start with revenues. Our property tax revenues, as Jennifer has mentioned, have been a topic of a significant amount of discussion with the City Council over the last several months. The budget does assume that we're shifting within the current tax rate from debt to the general fund, keeping us under the rollback rate within the current tax rate, and then increasing to fund the park bond projects that would be offset by the increase to the homestead exemption that you've already passed. The budget assumes stable recurring sales tax revenue consistent with the financial management policy statement direction, and targeted fee increases to help offset the impacts from our friends down the road in Austin, as we have discussed numerous times. We also have identified rate increases on the utility side to fund capital and operating increases for implementation of the IWRP, and in anticipation of the 60% groundwater reduction mandate. On the expenditure side, the budget includes growth in the operating budget to meet our base service levels, and that includes funding our current personnel costs and a 3% merit pool. While the merit pool is budgeted at 3% of salaries, the individual merit awards given performance. Since the city does not give cost of living adjustments or any kind of automatic step increases or longevity pay increases, and our employees are going to be having to cover increased cost of benefits, it is very important this year that not only does their merit cover the increased cost of living, but that they're not taking home less at the end of the day because their benefits costs have gone up. The exact amount of the employees' benefits cost increase is being worked through an employee committee. They'll be making a recommendation to management. On the city side, we have budgeted a 7% increase. And a lot of this is being just driven by increasing claims activity, as well as replenishing or actually increasing the reserve that we have set aside for claims. So we also have planned increases built into the base budget for infrastructure rehabilitation funding, along with additions to service levels to meet the Sugar Land Way, and I'll talk about those in a little more detail. On the CIP side, the budget funds some key projects in fiscal year 20, as you've had several workshops over the last couple of meetings on the proposed CIP projects, and we have also built in the remaining park projects from the 2013 authorization. These projects will require the increase to the tax rate, and it'll be about a penny. We do not have the certified tax roll yet, and so the exact amount will be determined once we receive that, but that amount is being offset for residents based on the increased homestead exemption. Throughout our discussions with the City Council, the CIP includes a plan for a GO bond program with a November bond election. We have gone ahead and built those projects into the 5-year CIP. They are shown in the CIP in fiscal year 22, but they would be funded upon voter approval over a 3-year period. So that would be anywhere between 21 and 23. But the exact timing of any particular projects would be determined by City Council at a later date. The enterprise CIP and operating budgets also includes the IWRP implementation and preparations for the groundwater reduction mandate, which is right around the corner, right outside the 5-year window in 2025. So now is the time to be putting in the infrastructure and making the plans to be able to meet that mandate. And so overall, our budget is structurally balanced, it is sustainable into the future, and it meets our fund balance policies. So going back to what Jennifer was talking about in our peer cities, looking at our staffing levels, we have historically had very lean staffing levels, running just below 8 FTEs per 1,000 residents, and that's full-time equivalent employees. We did staff up in fiscal year 17, fiscal year 18, just prior to the annexation. But then once you add the population in that we annexed, which was about 30,000 residents, we dropped to about 6.8 per 1,000, and we have stayed there because we have not added any positions other than the annexation in the last 2 years. So the red line on this chart is the peer city average that was on the chart that Jennifer showed you earlier. And so you can see that even with adding the positions that we're recommending in the fiscal year 20 budget, we will still be a lean 7.16 employees per 1,000 residents. So we're still well below that average. And so this is the historical merit pool that we've had over the last 10 years or so. I go back to fiscal year 2009 because that was really the last economic downturn that we have, and kind of illustrates, the volatility of the economy and the impact that CPI has compared to what is expected of the city, and the fact that even if the oil market is down or the economy is down, we still have to deliver services, and we still need to be able to give our employees the pay that they deserve. And so we want to make sure that we're recognizing them and compensating them fairly. So that is the 3% merit pool illustrated there compared to what's been budgeted for other years. And then as part of the annual budget, we calculate the benefit burden as a percent of the total budgeted compensation, and this is part of the council's compensation philosophy. And this year we have a slight increase in the benefit burden from 30.7 to 30.1 or 31.2%, and but we're still well below our benchmarks compared to the state and local government level, which is around 37%, and private sector employers over 500, which is running around 35%. All right, so now I'm going to get into the individual fund detail, and this again is an overview. We have about 8 hours of budget workshops scheduled, and so we will get into the detail. You can ask questions at the end, but we'll have plenty of time to have a lot of discussion, and we will bring the different departments up, and I'll let you grill them rather than me because they're the experts. I just figure out how to pay for it. So the general fund, just an overview for those that are not familiar, is the main operating fund for the city. It accounts for all activity that's not required to be accounted for separately. So basically anything that we're not legally required to or operationally want to keep it separate, we account for it here. It's your typical government functions that everybody thinks of: fire, police, public works, parks, code enforcement, things like that, animal services. The main funding sources here are property taxes and sales taxes. And so you can see that on this next chart, excuse me. So the fiscal year 20 budget has revenues of $94.38 million. 73% of that is coming from property tax and sales tax. And so property tax is making up 33%. That is with the shift in additional revenue from within the current tax rate. And then 40% is coming from sales tax. The remaining 27% is coming from other sources such as franchise fees, user fees, and permits, and fines and forfeitures. And so when we budget for our sales tax growth, I leave 2016 on this chart, even though it's a couple years ago. It really just illustrates that the fact that we have the volatility that we have to deal with in sales tax. And so in 2016, we had a significant incentive agreement that came to an end. And we knew that was happening. We planned for it. But then in 2017, not only did we have to absorb the loss of that revenue, but we also had the economic downturn. And so 2017 was kind of a readjustment year, and we recognized going into fiscal year 18 that we needed to change the way we were budgeting for sales tax. And at that point, we started only budgeting for recurring sales tax revenue, recognizing that a lot of our sales tax, the business-to-business sales tax, is tied to oil and gas and could be one-time in nature, and we don't want to be dependent on that to fund our ongoing operations and our ongoing expenses. And so in 2018 and 2019, the blue, and even into 20, the blue represents the recurring revenue streams. And so we are now budgeting and have been budgeting for current revenue streams only, with no growth from sales tax. And then the red that you see in 2018 and 2019 is the one-time revenue that is coming in, as well as the revenue that is over budget. And so it has really set us in a good place, because we now have those funds in the bank, and they can be appropriated during the following fiscal year. We've actually been able to do a couple of major budget amendments this year to provide one-time funding for projects after the spring retreat that council wanted us to go ahead and move forward with, and we've been able to utilize that more quickly than we would have otherwise if we had counted on those funds for recurring expenditures. So it really, the idea is we should be coming in over budget on sales tax, and that is a good thing. The proposed expenditures for the general fund total $99.83 million. This does include the interfund transfers. When you see the general fund number at the end, it's going to be a little less in the total roll-up, because it will not include transfers. But this also includes one-time funding from those additional revenue streams that we've brought in previous years, from one-time sales tax and from savings in prior year funds, or fiscal years. Of the general fund, 43% is going to fund public safety, which is fire, police, and public safety dispatch. We have 15% is the next highest going to general government, which includes our IT investments, human resources, all of the typical city, a lot of the city hall finances in there, because we're not small enough to really warrant, we're not big enough to warrant our own slice of the pie here. And then public works is next with 14%, and that is including all of the infrastructure rehabilitation that we have built in to the budget, or a large chunk of it. And so, speaking of infrastructure rehabilitation, that is the single biggest increase in the proposed budget. So not only are we increasing the recurring base budget funding from $1.77 million in fiscal year 19 to a little over $2 million in fiscal year 20, we are supplementing that with the Sugar Land Way from recurring funding to bring it up to $3 million. And so that is where we were planning to be in fiscal year 23, and we will be there in fiscal year 20. We're also supplementing that with about almost $500,000 in one-time funding from the additional funds that we had. So we're making significant progress on funding our infrastructure rehabilitation, and then we're able to hold it steady through the forecast and actually grow it a little bit toward the end once we hit that fiscal year 23. And we're hitting there a couple years early from where we thought we were going to in our original plan. So there are recurring additions throughout the organization. I will not run through all of those this evening. It will require much more discussion, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the things that where we're recommending funds, things like our collections improvement program over in municipal court, because we now, we want to improve our collections and our efficiency. We also want to improve the security of the court. That was a recommendation that came out of the court operational review of the court assessment. So you'll see an additional officer to help improve our court security. And then at the last workshop, you had the recommendation from the public safety dispatch assessment for additional quality assurance investment. And so there is a swap out of some part-time positions for a full-time position on that. So we will go into a lot of these during the August 1st workshop. There are personnel needs tied to some of these. One of them is the stormwater plan, where you just approved the resolution that Taylor brought forward. And some of these positions are offset by reductions of part-time or temporary positions. So just to illustrate some of the positions, it is a net increase in the general fund, and don't panic, it's 29 positions, but 17 of them are directly tied to an insourcing proposal for right-of-way maintenance. So I want to just put these out here for what the positions are. We have the court collections position and the bailiff that I just talked about. Then we have some service level supplements where we need to really kind of supplement our staffing to be able to meet our service levels in accordance with the Sugar Land Way, and that would be in our GIS area, in public works, in the streets and drainage area, transportation and mobility with an operations manager, and then in environmental and neighborhood services, we have 4 positions that are just needed to just meet our current service levels. And that is in fleet, facilities, and animal services. We have a stormwater coordinator to implement the stormwater program. Our one additional traffic officer that we discussed as part of the loss of the red light cameras. That was the proposal that we talked through with the police chief. There are some options that we can look at, but the police department's recommendation was to add 1 officer and some overtime, and so those have been added into the recommended budget. We're also adding some additional capacity with crime scene technical support, the quality assurance supervisor in public safety dispatch, and some code enforcement additional staffing in the fire department with a fire inspector. So the last group that you see here is the 17 positions that are tied to the insourcing of right-of-way management. And so with that, I just want to kind of give a brief overview, and we will talk about this in more detail during the workshops. The city has over 665 acres of right-of-way and easements that we currently maintain by contracting services for landscape beautification and tractor mowing. Since 2016, as council is aware, you've had to approve all the contracts. We have been seeing significant cost increases, and this has been a pretty regular occurrence over the last 3 years. So over the last year or so, Public Works has been evaluating the potential to bring these services in-house as an alternative to the current model, and they have been reviewing this work and this recommendation through the Council Finance Audit Committee and communicating that to the City Council. So the proposal can be funded within the recurring contractual funding that's in the fiscal year 20 budget, plus a one-time investment of $320,000 to buy the equipment. And then we would transition the service to be provided in-house beginning in April of 2020, and we would recognize recurring savings in year 2 that would continue throughout the 5-year forecast. And so those savings have been incorporated into the 5-year forecast. All right, so then we also have some one-time funding items because we had our conservatively budgeting our sales tax and recognizing it after the fact. It allows us to appropriate these funds through the budget process. And so we do have some significant investments that are recommended. The biggest one is the supplement to the infrastructure rehabilitation. But we also have and some things that are shown here are the comprehensive user fee study, which will help us further diversify our revenue streams and make sure that we're recovering our non-tax revenue streams from the appropriate users. We'll have an update to the comprehensive mobility plan, replacement of fire bunker gear, and a public safety compensation study. So those are things that we don't need to budget those every year, and so whenever we do budget them, they get called out specifically as one-time funding. These are shown as a drawdown of fund balance, so when you see the general fund, and that's why it was $94 million in revenues and $99 million in expenses, because we're drawing that down for these one-time items. Okay. So next is the debt service fund. This fund accounts for the repayment of the city's tax-supported debt obligations. So the primary source of revenue in this fund is property taxes, along with transfers in from other funds to where we have like the annexed MUD debt, where the MUD's actually issued tax-backed debt, but we would normally pay for that from our utility revenues. So we do a transfer in from the utility fund into this fund to pay for that debt, and that's by policy. We also have transfer in from the tourism fund to support things like the Sugarland Conference Center at the Marriott. That is 100% being supported by hotel taxes and not property taxes. The revenue source in the revenue stream in the debt service fund brings into account all of the revenue assumptions that we talked about with the property tax rate, shifting capacity within the rollback rate to the general fund, and raising the tax rate to support the park bond projects. So if the tax rate for the park bonds doesn't get approved, then those projects don't move forward. However, you've already approved the increase to the homestead exemption. So it's like, it's this web here that all of these things are all tied together. So I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I want to make sure it all makes sense as we go through the individual funds. So here you can see graphically the makeup of the revenue streams. 72% of the revenues are coming from property taxes, with the other 27% coming from those self-supporting debt, the transfers in from utility and tourism. And the majority of the expenses here are the debt service payments and the in-city MUD rebates that we grant to help the in-city MUD districts lower their tax rates to residents. And so those are contractual obligations that we pay for here. So the city typically issue 20-year debt. So with our debt service schedule, we structure our debt so that we're paying off 50% of principal within the first 10 years of the bond issue. It's a very aggressive repayment schedule, probably more aggressive than I've seen in most other cities. And that gives us this chart that you see here, which is our current debt service to maturity. And you see the blue is the interest, and that amount gets smaller and smaller because we're paying off that large amount of principal every year. We're paying $20 million in principal in fiscal year 20. And so as you pay that off, then that interest cost just gets smaller and smaller. This schedule is what allows us to have capacity to fund our capital improvement program, plus a portion of the proposed bond program over the 5 years. So that's where a part of the capacity is coming from. And we'll talk about the bond package here in just a moment when we get to the CIP. Okay, so we have 3 enterprise funds in the city, airport, utilities, and solid waste. And these funds are operated, or these operations are run similar to what you would see in a private business, to where they each generate their own revenues and support their operating expenses, including debt repayment and capital projects. And these operations are not supported by general government finances such as property taxes and sales taxes. So within the water fund, the budget focus is on implementation of the Integrated Water Resource Plan and focus on securing water supplies for our city's long-term water needs. We do have some additional water rights that we were able to acquire, and the budget has funding built in for those. So as I mentioned earlier, 2025 is just outside our forecast window, but it shows the investments that we need to make to be able to get there, to hit that 60% groundwater reduction mandate that we've got to be at in 2025. So in order to accomplish this in a financially responsible manner and have this be a self-sustaining fund, that means we've got to raise rates to be able to generate the revenues to have the money to be able to build these improvements. So as we have discussed in prior retreat discussions and workshops, the budget does include a 5% increase to water and wastewater rates and a 10% increase on the surface water side. And I want to point out that we in total have not raised rates for water and surface water since January of 2014, so it will be 6 years between the January 2020, when these rates would go into effect, and the last time we raised utility rates. And on the water and wastewater side, it's actually been even longer than that because we haven't raised that part of the rate since 2011. So it's been a while. And the overall impact to the average, or not even the average resident, if you have 12,000 gallons of water usage, it's about $5 a month is the overall impact of this. It's about 7% to a residential user.
And Jennifer, we made a conscious decision that we wanted to finish the integrated water resource plan before we undertook, let's get a comprehensive look at what our water needs were before we addressed those. So that was a conscious decision by council over that number of years to finish the integrated water resource plan, of which we had Councilmember Porter and Councilmember Gandhi participated in that.
That's correct, much to the consternation of some of the rating agencies that didn't really like our strategy as much as we argued our case. But this forecast does reflect those rate increases. We also have budgeted for a utility rate study to go in and do a wholesale look at our utility rate structure and determine what is the best way for us to generate the revenue that we need to generate in order to implement this plan.
Right.
And so there may be some other changes. There will need to be future increases. What those look like, we do not know at this point. We're going to let the rate study determine that. So with the utility fund, the majority of revenues, 84%, is coming from charges for services, which is those water, wastewater, and surface water charges. We have 12% coming from bond proceeds. That is going to fund the 7.5 out of 9.5 million in capital projects in this fund, and that is seen in the CIP and rehab column pie on the right there with the CIP and rehab at 15%. Those rates are supporting the operating expenses and the repayment of debt, including the debt that is on the debt service fund side, which is included in that transfers pie slice of 17%. So that is not only going to fund overhead costs, it's also going to fund the debt that we brought on from annexing the various MUDs over the years. The good news is that is also paying off right outside the 5-year window, so we'll start to see that decline. In the utility fund, we have additions for the water rights from both the Brazos River Authority and the Gulf Coast Water Authority. We have 2 positions added to this fund. Three is an airport. One for water quality, a technician for additional water quality sampling, and a GM worker for additional customer service field work relative to like disconnects and new service connections, things like that, to support the Treasury operation. Other additions include the increased rehabilitation, focus on preventative maintenance, and our contractual increases that are CPI cost increases that are called out for those that we do contract out. Okay, next is the airport fund, and this fund accounts for all activity associated with the Sugar Land Regional Airport. Revenues are generated by the airport from the sale of fuel to customers, along with charges for services provided to the customers and hangar leases. Revenues in the budget include an 8-cent increase to the fuel markup, along with other increases to charges for services that we have been reviewing with the Finance Audit Committee, and we'll review those in more detail during the budget workshop. The airport has been seeing a steady increase in activity levels, which you can see here in these 2 charts. Not only is it an increase in fuel gallons sold, which is a pass-through cost, so we buy the fuel and then we resell it at a markup to our customers, but you can see that the number of aircraft served is anticipated to increase pretty substantially in fiscal year 20. They've been growing over the last couple of years. So the airport has revenues budgeted at $18.5 million, and 72% of that is coming from fuel sales, and the remainder is coming there from the hangar leases. They do have one project that will be financed by bond proceeds, along with their TxDOT grant funds that will be coming in to reimburse for land acquisition. And on the expenditure side, in the operating budget, is a big chunk of that is the pass-through cost of the fuel for resale. They're also paying for their own debt service and capital projects. And an overhead cost, I have to mention that for Phil, because he just loves that one. So some of the budget additions in the airport is a total of 3 full-time equivalent positions, 2 line crew positions, and 2 part-time airport customer service reps, which is 1 full-time equivalent. These would be directly tied to the customer activity levels, and Phil is very good about not adding these positions until they're really needed. And so we kind of put that in hands. Once we approve the funding for it, he looks at his operations and determines whether he really needs to add those before he goes out and hires someone. Some one-time funding is the majority of the other additions. They're not all listed here, but we've got a replacement of a generator at the air traffic control tower, some renovations in the U.S. Customs building, and repairs to various infrastructure at the airport, taxiway, airfields, runway condition evaluation, things like that. All right. So the last operating fund is the last city operating fund is the solid waste fund. And this fund accounts for all of our residential solid waste collection and recycling service. And it, again, is similar to the airport with the fuel. This is a pass-through, so we contract the service out, and we pass on the cost of the service, plus the administration of it to our residents. There is a 2.5% CPI increase built into the contract, so rates would go from $18.91 to $19.38 per month beginning in January of 2020. There is quite a bit of uncertainty in the national recycling market. If you've been paying attention to the news lately, I think there was a couple articles that came out yesterday. I saw something on the news even last night about the recycling market. So there is potential for further discussion on either service level changes or price changes relative to that, but those are not built into the budget. All right, so the city charter requires the preparation of a 5-year capital improvement program with the first year appropriated in the budget. The out years, which is years 2 through 5 or fiscal year 21 to 24, are for planning purposes only, but we take that a step further and we go beyond what the charter requires and we fiscally constrain that. And so we match the projects to the capacity that we have identified within the 5-year financial forecast. The CIP includes both general and enterprise CIP projects, and so when we did the workshops with Jesse, we actually broke those up into 2 separate discussions, just because it's a lot to take in one sitting. The enterprise CIP is fully supported by the participating funds. We did add in the projects for the GEO bond program that council has asked us to bring forward. And so those, as I said, are all built into fiscal year 22. However, it would be implemented as a 3-year program based on approval by the voters and pending further council direction on timing. So within fiscal year 20, we have about $16 million in capital projects, general capital projects, funded from the issuance of certificates of obligation, which is a tax-backed debt instrument, as well as funding the remaining park bond projects from 2013. In the out years, you'll see the GEO bond program, and then throughout the entire forecast, you'll see a significant investment on the utility CIP side, which is the capital investment needed for IWRP implementation, and the asset management plan, and helping us to continue reinvestment and rehabilitation of our infrastructure. So for fiscal year 20, these are some of the projects that you'll see actually being in the budget that you will be asked to, well, you'll be appropriating funds for them in fiscal year 20. And the first one on the list is, and Lane clarified that earlier this evening, that this phase of the public safety training facility would be for the Purple Road. If you remember that from the earlier presentation, I had to make a note as to which color it was, but that would be the next phase of the internal facilities that would serve, like getting you to different parts of the facility, and he explained it a lot better than I can, so I'll just leave it at that. We have funding for rehab of city facilities and the remaining funding for our ERP system replacement, which will be coming before you on I'd say probably the next 6 weeks or so for approval. But don't hold me to that timeline because I'm not in charge of bringing that one forward. Settlers Park drainage improvement, that's a huge drainage project that we've been working on for the last couple of years. Council identified that as a priority. We actually accelerated one phase of it to do it all at once, and so that one is funded in fiscal year 20, as well as some major street rehabilitation. We have some significant street reconstruction planned, including Lexington from Highway 6 to Williams Trace, some sections of Palm Royale, 7th Street, and Dulles Avenue for just as examples of things that would be covered in that street rehabilitation funding. And so then in addition to the park bond projects, on the airport side, we do have a hangar relocation that is needed to to complete another taxiway project. So we've got to move the hangar first. And then on the enterprise CIP for utilities, the IWRP projects. And so what that looks like with the breakdown, it is $41.5 million in projects in fiscal year 20. You can see that the largest chunk is parks, and a portion of that is donations from Cullinan Foundation, as well as joint participation that will be funded from the Sugarland 4B Corporation. The rest of the park slice of the pie is the GO bond projects. And then we have our municipal and drainage and streets projects that I just addressed, and then the remainder is the IWRP and utility projects. Over the 5 years, the CIP totals $263.8 million. That does include about $90 million for the 21 to 23 GO bond program. And so in looking at how the IWRP even over the 5-year period, you can see the substantial influence of the investment in surface water, because it's almost $73 million to get to that 60% point where we're going to need to be. So there is some significant investment that needs to be made over the next 5 years there. Okay, so overall for the GO bond program that you've asked us to bring forward, I know Jesse and Chris have done a lot of the talking. I'll talk a little bit on the financial side of that because as I mentioned, we have in the debt service schedule that you saw earlier, there is some capacity that is being opened up within the existing tax rate. It's not enough to cover all of the needs that have been identified. So within that, we can cover about half of the cost of the 90 million program from within our current capacity, but that leaves half the projects unfunded, which you all told us was not acceptable. So in order to make substantial progress on these projects, or satisfactory progress, the 90 million package would need about a 3-cent tax increase, depending on what happens with property tax values in the future. This is assuming no growth going forward. That would be pretty much the maximum that we would need based on our current taxable value. That would equate to about a 9% increase overall in residential tax bills, or about $100 a year after the 3-cent increase.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
But that would not be this year.
It would not be this year, yes. Thank you. This would be after the park bonds. And so once it goes to the voters, the policy statements say we'll raise the tax rate to support the bonds. In this case, you actually do need to raise the 3 cents in the first year to be able to implement the projects over the 3-year period. And the actual project timing, as I said, would be subject to further direction by City Council, but the breakdown of the projects right now is roughly a little more than half, 53% is our drainage projects that the community has, come to you and said, what are you going to do? When are you going to fix the drainage issues that we're now experiencing that we've never experienced before? 29% is public safety and facilities, which would include things like the training facility and improvements to city buildings so that we can keep our employees safe. We have carved out the animal shelter separately here, and I believe that one probably you'll have a separate proposition for that. And then the remaining 11% would be street reconstruction. All right, we are almost there. We have 2 economic development corporations in the city, and they are each funded through a 1/4 cent sales tax that was approved by voters. We call them I call them our 4A and 4B. The state calls them a Type A and Type B corporation. The funding on these is restricted by state law. The main purpose of these funds is to grow our tax base through economic development efforts. And the use of these funds is restricted in accordance with this Economic Development Act. So the corporations have a pretty significant budget in fiscal year 20. A lot of it is one-time, which I've called out here in green. We have some capital project reimbursements that are being made, as well as setting aside reserves for opportunities, and so those are being treated as one-time. But between the 2 corporations, we are funding about $860,000 worth of capital projects. And so as we get into the detail of the corporations, we can go over those. We'll be reviewing the Sugar Land 4B Corporation's budget with them tomorrow afternoon. Okay, so to summarize the totals, you haven't seen a grand total yet. Here it is, $272.1 million. $40.5 million of that is the FY20 capital project funding. $231 million is the operating budget, and that is excluding interfund transfers. So that is basically that's what we need to run the city for fiscal year 20. As I said, we do have significant detail to review with you, which we will do over the next several weeks through the budget workshops. Some key dates, these are just regular council meetings, so at your Tuesday evening meetings. Next week, we'll have a workshop on the proposed GO bond program. The next direct budget item would be a public hearing on August 20th. Then we will have public hearings on the proposed tax rate and PIT assessment on the 27th, second public hearing on the tax rate on the 3rd, wrapping up with adoption of the budget and tax rate on September 17th. And then so for those early risers who just want to come hear more about the budget, we will be meeting on Thursday mornings starting at 7:30 here in City Hall to go over the proposed budget in more detail. This will be council's opportunity to ask us more in-depth questions, and we will get into a lot more discussion on what actually the budget is made up of, because obviously can't do it in here because it's way too much. Property tax process is commonly referred to as the truth in taxation process. So I have the next step in this process is for us to get our certified roll from the Fort Bend Appraisal District, and I have been advised that they anticipate certifying toward the end of this week, I think Friday. I should get reports early next week. I will start running the calculations in conjunction with Carrie, the county tax assessor, and then we'll get you the reports as soon as we can to let you know what that tax rate is going to need to be. On August 8th at the workshop, you will be asking you to take a record vote to publish the proposed tax rate, and that triggers the publication of the notice as well as the 2 public hearings. It is not adoption of the tax rate, it is just beginning the process. And then that tax rate actually gets adopted after the budget on September 17th. So with that, and before I wrap up, we have accomplished a ton so far, but we do have a lot more to review. And before I stop, I would like to acknowledge the budget office staff, because while I'm up here doing all the talking, they're upstairs, and if y'all can please stand, they're upstairs putting these books together, tying out the numbers and making sure it's all correct. And so we have Rosita Bichon. She has been the ringleader of everything, kind of keeping it all together over the last couple of months. Adrian Miller, sorry, I'm like jumping around. Justin Mejerado and Renee Clay actually joined us about 3 weeks ago and jumped right in. And so I've been very appreciative of their support, because there's just no way that one person can do all of this. So I do want to recognize them for their hard work. And we just received notification this week that we got our GFOA budget award for last year's budget. So we will be bringing that forward as soon as we can for proper recognition of staff with that. So with that, we do have budget and CIP books for each of you to take home, nice big binders. If you will please remember to bring that with you to the budget workshops. It will help you kind of follow along and reference any numbers that we may be talking about. But with that, if you have any questions that you would like clarified at this point, we'd be happy to address those.
Just a comment, Jennifer. When we did our fall retreat last year, there was a recognition collectively by the entire city council that we were going to return to the Sugar Land way, which in essence it's really an attitude. It's an attitude of providing the highest level of service and an expectation higher than even what our residents would like. There was also a recognition that in order to do that we would have to properly fund the budget. This reflects the action or the direction that we gave our city manager. Now, and thank you for putting this together. This reflects the action that we gave the city manager and the staff at that retreat that we wanted to fully fund those services at the level that we'd served them before. And I'd also like to make a comment that what's in the budget, although that's great work, and that takes care of a piece of that the general obligation bonds that we're talking about doing, we haven't called the election, but I have no doubt that we will, about 91 million, about 47 million of which is drainage, was a recognition on the part of the council that in order to address both the severity of rain events and the shorter frequency of when those events occurred, that we would have to take steps to address drainage needs that we had never taken as a council before. Quite frankly, the region had never taken, nor had any other entities. So that's a reflection of the commitment that the council has to making sure. We've always said we want to have not only the safest city, but we want to protect our residents. And that means not only from police, fire, it also means from significant rainfall events, and or you can read that as flooding. So with that, council members, comments? Anyone? Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Ms. May. Item number 7, City Council, City Manager reports. Let's go with the council member report. Stuart, I'm going to start with you.
Well, let's see, on July 4th, I attended maybe the best fireworks show that I've ever seen, and you know, it's a great fireworks show when you have to brush all the burnt embers off of you, and it was outstanding. Last Tuesday, there was an event at the Fort Bend History Museum. It was a kickoff of the History Rising campaign for to help redevelop the Fort Bend History Museum. And if you've never been there, I encourage you to go there. It's fascinating. And then last Wednesday, the St. Hope Sugar Land Health Center expansion and relocation wisely into District 3. I went to the grand opening, and it's an extraordinary facility that serves underserved populations, and we're very proud to have that organization in the city.
Thanks, Stuart. Mish. Carol.
I hosted Boise Cascade at the Smart Financial Center, and Councilmember Lane and I attended the First Colony HOA's Freedom 5K run. And I wanted to congratulate staff on the tremendous success of the Red, White, and Boom Festival, and I had EOC training.
Jennifer.
I attended Fort Bend County Day at the Skeeters Ballpark, and Councilmember Carmali and I attended a grand opening of Donner and Gyros sandwich shop here in, is it Richmond or Sugar Land? It's right on the fault line in the county. And that's it.
Steve.
It's been covered, Mayor.
Gotcha.
Mayor, I attended also with yourself and Stuart, the Fort Bend History Museum. First time I've ever been there. didn't even know it existed, so it was nice to go there and to learn about what they do. This past weekend, I attended the Telfair Homeowners Association. They had a patriotic bike parade, which our fine police department and Sugar Land Fire Department were also present, and I got to speak there. Judge George was also in presence. And the grand opening, as Jennifer mentioned, and yesterday at the Ismaili Center, Brian Middleton and his chief of staff also were there, so I was able to have lunch with those guys.
Thank you. The only thing I'd like to mention is going forward, we being the city of Sugar Land, probably Chris and I and Alan will be taking a leadership role in the county to address drainage. And we will be working with other cities, other mayors, to make sure that we get the proper focus on drainage in this county as opposed to facilities. We'll also be taking a greater role in regional activities or regional transportation plan, which is sadly in need of some much needed support on the Transportation Policy Council due to some changeover in elected office. So you will be seeing and hearing much more of things that we'll be pushing around the county and around the region. Al?
No problem.
This time we're going to move to item number 8, closed executive session. 8A, closed executive session is authorized by Chapter 551 Texas Government Code in accordance with Section 551071. Consultation with our wonderful attorney for the purpose of receiving legal advice regarding the city of McAllen et al. Versus the state of Texas. I look forward to hearing about that. Thanks to staff for taking care of the budget. That's a big deal. Thank y'all.
All kinds of good. Donated while keep. Donate first, recycle second. Don't trash it. Just look at sugarlandtx.gov/charities for places to donate. If you don't have a